Andy, who's our so welcome everybody to this session of the Prime Working Group on Careers and Sustainability from the UK and Ireland chapter of Prime. I'm going to be introducing the organization Prime for those of you who don't know it, and the work of our working group very briefly before handing over to our speaker today, Andy Nelson. Andy has just asked everybody who's in the room, for those people who are just joining now, if you could put into the chat box how many years you've been working in whatever field you are. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's the field is not important, but it's how long you've been in the workplace. I think if I've understood that correctly, Andy. Yes, it seems as though I have. Right. Okay. So welcome. The Prime organization, UN Principles for Responsible Management Education, is part of, it's an initiative housed within the United Nations Global Compact, which is the United Nations organization, essentially CSR supporting organization of around about 10,000 members, corporate members around the world. Our goal as an organization is we're a business school movement aiming at the development of policies and practices in relation to responsible management education, the development of responsible leadership capacities, supporting sustainable business one way or the other. And of course, like all United Nations organizations, we are aligned with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. All of the signatories to Prime, of which there are about 850 to 900 around the world at the moment, sign up to these 7 principles, which are broadly framed, but essentially, as you can see, touch on our purpose as business schools, the values we bring to this work, and then teaching, researching, partnering, practicing, and sharing as well. These were recently refreshed, well, about a year or so ago, to bring them up to date, because Prime has been around since 2007. There was a feeling that the principles needed to be somewhat refreshed, as I say, about a year ago. So we are a global network of roundabout, or if you take all of the business schools that are members of Prime, something like 3 million students, something like 200,000 faculty, across 17 chapters. A chapter is like a regional branch, and we are from the UK and Ireland regional branch. And there are also, I realize that slide is now up to date. There aren't 9 working groups. There is considerably more than that. There's about 17 working groups, which I'll touch on in a moment. We need to update. There's somebody in the waiting room, I noticed, Karen. What about the Careers and Sustainability Working Group? Well, Karen and I brought this group into life, as it were. We founded it in early 2023, so we've been going on for around about 3 years now. We've developed a network of around about 200 people who are largely academics. There are some consultants. There are also quite a lot of career service colleagues in the group as well from a higher education setting. And we've also attracted various businesses along the way and representatives of various businesses as well. We try and develop, well, no, we don't try. I think we do develop collaborative projects at this intersection of as it says, the work on sustainability, careers, and employability. And we've been increasingly doing some work around the green jobs sector as well. And we are interested in bringing our kind of research lens to that area, as well as doing what I call very practical skills-based things as well. And for those of you who've had contact with us before, you'll know that in 2025, we published the results of our survey-based work into employers' views on early careers in sustainability. That publication is available. We can put the link in, well, the link is in the slides, which you'll get later on. That was in collaboration with 10 different Prime members in the UK and Ireland, as well as the UN Global Compact and Window, the reporting initiative and platform. Just at the moment, wrapping up is a project called Green Skills for Green Jobs, which has been a funded project by the Quality Assurance Agency of Higher Education in the UK. Again, a project which has been developed by 5 Prime members in the UK, working alongside SOS, Students Organising for Sustainability UK, as a collaborative project, identifying where green skills education and learning is happening well within UK higher education, not just business schools, but higher education as a whole, and where it could be improved. And watch out for that report, which should be coming out in the autumn. There are altogether now 17 working groups across Prime. This is across Prime Global as opposed to Prime UK and Ireland. And the work that we've been doing within the UK and Ireland Careers and Sustainability network is now a contributing element within. You'll see that working group called Responsible Work and Purposeful Careers. And if any of our global colleagues from that global working group are here, welcome to you as well as all of our established UK and Ireland network. But for those of you who are just kind of finding Prime for the first time and are interested in it, these are really very active working groups working again at that intersection between research and teaching practice in this very wide variety of areas. And I'd encourage you to become involved in the ones that connect well with your particular priorities. At this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Karen, to talk about the book launch, her book, well, her and the many other contributors, which will be our next event in our calendar after the summer break. And she will then also move on to introduce Andy, who's our guest. Karen.
Thank you very much. So I've just put the link in the chat to register for the book launch. Industry speakers talking about their contributions to this chapter, to this book, all sharing their expertise, lived experience around transferable, transformative skills, how to develop them. So really interesting, whether you're an educator, career professional, or working in industry, looking to embed this. And on to the next slide, which I don't seem to have the controls for, Jonathan. So if you could please move forward.
I have moved it on, but obviously it hasn't worked.
Oh, no, it was a bit slow. Now it's gone to, thank you. So I will put into the chats here. I saw there was a query about signing up to these groups. So you can sign up via those web links to our UK and Ireland group and our global group, the Responsible Work and Purposeful Careers. And there's simultaneous lots of similarities, but a much more global outreach. And on to the more important business of today, and Andy Nelson joining us. And I am going to read the formal introduction because I think Andy very much deserves it. So Andy is the founder of the Positive Career Coach, and after more than 25 years in consulting, financial services and technology, Andy made his own transition into purpose-driven work. Today, he helps experienced professionals and senior leaders move into meaningful careers in climate and sustainability, showing them how to use the skills they've already built to make a bigger impact, rather than starting again from scratch. Andy has supported professionals from across the world to navigate career change with confidence, combining real-world commercial experience with practical coaching. And on a very personal note, I'm really delighted to be hosting Andy for you today. I'm an avid follower of all of his work through LinkedIn, his newsletters, been incredibly helpful to me, embedding that into my own teaching, working with students. He's genuinely a really informed expert in this space, and he's great fun to listen to. So enjoy the session. Over to you, Andy.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you very much. That's really kind of very flattering. I feel I've quite taken aback. Hello, everyone else. Now, I'm not massively great at multitasking, and I need to share some slides. So play yourself some background music whilst I sort that out, which should be this. And what happens when I do this is I can no longer see what I'm sharing. So I'm looking to you guys to tell me whether or not things are moving forward, which is good. So I asked at the start, and apologies, Jonathan, for sort of slightly interfering with the introduction there, asking people how long they've been working in an area, just to get a sense of the kind of people we have in our room today. And hopefully all mid and senior careers, which is exactly the kind of people that I typically tend to help. Now, it is important to state that what happens in the next 50 minutes or so is not the important bit. The important bit is what you do differently because of this. So I have done probably hundreds of these kind of conversations and webinars and so on. And I know that it is very easy to turn up, listen, feel like you've done something meaningful, and then go back to doing what you were doing and expecting different results, which we all know is a first sign of badness. So I would encourage you to think about everything that we go through today, which is going to be pretty quick and very intense, to be like the contents page of a process and a method, and to be listening for something that resonates, something that you think, I might try that, in terms of doing something differently. So that's kind of setting the scene and the tone for what we're about to do. Now, I know why you're here, because the clue is in the name of this discussion, but I think it's fair that I also share a little bit about why am I here. And I'm here because of one question, and that question is this, which I hope you can now see. Give me a nod, somebody. Karen, you're still on my screen, so okay, all right. So this question came from an impeccably dressed chief marketing officer of a global skincare and cosmetics company that you will know, but I will not name. In the middle of a board conversation, I was live from the spare bedroom. This is kind of COVID era, projected on a 2-meter screen to a room full of people. And when this question came, all I had was just the white noise and silence and this repetitive question, which is, what am I doing with my life? If it has come down to this. I had spent the previous 3 or 4 weeks pushing my teams to be gathering the data, to be working late nights. We'd worked through the weekend, and I had basically arrived full of the caffeine and anxiety that happens in pointy-ended consulting engagements. And this question was basically the last straw. Now, as you can imagine, if all I had was that white noise, then the rest of this meeting did not go well. And when I came back from this meeting, it was the trigger to say, I think I need to do something differently, because this is mainly pointless. The world is on fire, and we need to be doing more than taking our own coffee cups. And so prior to this moment, I'd already had a very traditionally successful sort of management consulting over into finance, a lot of strat consulting, taking startups through exits, and worked as an advisor to sort of startups in various different spaces. And I decided to take that change of career and the strategy and consulting perspective to help other people who found themselves trapped in work they didn't want to do and who wanted to do something more meaningful. And so, although it may sound grandiose, that has left me with this. My mission is your contribution. And so everything I do now is about helping people like you, the smart, capable professionals, be able to make your contribution to something which is bigger and more important than analyzing skincare insecurities in Chinese teenagers. So let's talk about today and how that translates. My mission is your contribution, and today's session is basically a process and action session. And so it's a very short introduction to the process of career change and career advancement and how that works. And through going through this process, we're going to see some of the common mistakes that people make. And I'm going to relentlessly be pointing out that pulling the same lever harder doesn't change the results. So again, I would encourage you to listen for something different that you might want to take on. And at the end of this, you're going to have something more useful than advice. You're going to have a process. Now, as part of today, it is not going to be, here is how to write your CV. Here are the job boards that you need to be looking at. Here is how to hack LinkedIn. Because mainly, I find that quite disingenuous, because most of that effort is wasted if you don't have the fundamentals in place. So, before we get into this, it is worth noting, one of the things that I've promised is a bit of a point of view around how the landscape is changing, particularly in the climate and sustainability space. So one of the things that I have the privilege of being part of is a lot of the big sort of macro level market shifts and who's hiring what. I work closely with a lot of recruiters and so on. And what we're seeing is that it's very different to just a couple of years ago. Now, obvious geopolitical reasons for a lot of that. And I think a lot of people are feeling the effects of that shift without necessarily being able to name why or what it means. So it feels like there are fewer sustainability job titles. And it feels like it's harder to get those roles because the demand supply is changing. But what I'm seeing, and my colleagues in this space are seeing, is that the work hasn't stopped, but it has changed. It is often showing up inside commercial roles or inside operational roles or inside product or strategy roles, which means that it is true there are fewer job titles with sustainability written on the tin, but the demand is still there. It's differently packaged. And what that means for us is, when you're trying to find these jobs, is that the job boards do look thinner and the roles are harder to recognize and the applications feel less effective. Now, it's not because you're doing something wrong, but it's because of the old approach of scanning titles, matching keywords and skills, and then applying at scale just doesn't work anymore. And that's where a lot of time gets wasted. So the consequence of this is that sequence matters more than ever. It is the order in which you do things that matters way more now than it used to. If you rely on looking at job titles, you miss the work that can be hiding in plain sight. And if you rely on applications, you can quite easily find yourself burning energy without creating any meaningful signal that the market can find. And if you start with tactics before decisions, then you end up working very hard, but in the wrong direction. So the goal of today is to give you a better way of doing things rather than more things to do. Is to help you see what actually needs to come first in this version of the market. Now, one of the other questions that I often ask is, where are you in this process? And in sessions like this, there are usually two broad groups of people in the room: currently exploring, which is interested in climate and sustainability work, but haven't fully landed on a particular direction. And then there are others who are already fairly clear. You know the role or the sector or the big problem that you're trying to work on, and you're actively trying to get it, but you're stuck. So it's different paths, but same frustration. And often it's the underlying issues which are causing that frustration. So just to make this a little bit clearer, I'm going to introduce you to Sarah. Sarah is a marketing director at a large consumer goods company, 10 years experience, good at her job, very well paid, but she genuinely wants her work to matter more. She's realized that her current career is no longer fulfilling. She's done what most sensible people do. She's read the articles. She's followed the right people on LinkedIn. She's bookmarked the interesting companies. She has a Notion page or a Google Doc called something like Climate Role Ideas with 11 tabs in separate windows, all color-coded for whether or not she thinks she could do it. The important thing here is that Sarah isn't lazy or indecisive. She's busy, but not moving. And what's slowing her down isn't lack of motivation, is that she hasn't decided what good progress actually looks like. That's why when we talk about the sequence, we have to start with how would you know when you found what you're looking for as the first and most difficult question to answer before you start to look. Now, the other end of the spectrum, we have James. James has already decided. He spent time last year researching the sector. He took a 12-week course. He knows the kind of work that he wants to do. He's applying consistently, 2 or 3 roles a week. He's updated his CV 400 times. And he's reaching out on LinkedIn looking for coffee conversations, and yet very little is coming back. And the silence is very confusing because he's doing everything that he was told he should do. Now, again, James is not passive. He's working hard, but he's not getting any traction. And the harder he tries, the louder that quiet voice of doubt becomes. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not actually qualified enough. Maybe I don't have the transferable skills. And that is probably the most dangerous moment in any career transition. That creeping doubt, the working hard but getting nowhere, is it me? And we're going to come back to James. And just to be clear, yes, obviously, this is an AI image because no one has a big red book without a title on their desk. So stock photos are involved in this presentation. So ultimately, two different situations. On the surface, they look very different. One is still exploring, the other is actively applying, but the feeling underneath is often the same. It is a sense of effort without progress, time passing without momentum, and the mounting frustration of wasted effort. Or the very real sense of running out of financial runway. I have to get a job before I run out of cash. And what this really costs, it has a pattern. Its time goes first, then energy, and most critically, and this is why it is difficult and critical, is our confidence starts to be ebbed away. And that is really the key. People don't suddenly give up. They quietly lower expectations. Maybe I should just look for something a bit more realistic. Maybe the time isn't right, the market's too tough. But the real danger is not this quiet failure, but it is this quiet contraction. It means 5 years from now, you'll be looking back and realizing that the grand plan for making your contribution has come to nothing, and that somehow you stayed working in a role you don't really care about. I sometimes call this, quite dramatically, deathbed regrets. But frankly, we kind of are talking about something that really is this personal and really is very consequential. There's a lot at stake. So a lot of people, the majority of people, when progress stalls, they draw the conversation. I just need to try harder. More reading, more research, more applications, more networking, more effort. Now that assumption feels logical, but it is also almost always wrong. The reason it is wrong is because it is the right actions, but in the wrong order. And the core idea of what I want you to hold on to today is that most climate career pivots don't fail. They take too long because people are taking the right actions, but in the wrong order. So fix the order and time compresses. So how does it actually happen? What does that actually mean? Well, I'm going to ask you a question. And it's a question that I want you to put into chat as an answer. I'm going to ask you the question, which is, think of the last person who had the power to say yes to you professionally, not like HR, the actual decision maker in a role that either you've applied to or have thought about applying to. What was their actual job title? Was it something like head of responsible sourcing or scope 3 program lead or director of enterprise risk or head of supplier partnerships? What was their title, if you can remember it? And in order for me to see the answers, I need to go over here. And then come down here and see chat. Haha. Okay. Now this is the bit where I have to remind myself that the reason I've written the word interlude and to play some imaginary music is that this is where people are typing stuff or are too scared to type. Perfect. Thank you. Andrew, not only were you first in the room, you also first answer. There may be a prize. This is 2 out of 2 that you are the winner for. Pro Vice Chancellor, Managing Director. Yes. Wolf Peter. Any more? Any more? Director of the Center. No job scope. Nothing. Do nothing or do everything. Yeah, sounds very familiar, Stephen. So these people, the decision makers, I'm going to call them all Susan. And Susan is lying awake at night on a Sunday evening with a real Monday morning problem. Not a big, how do we solve plastics and oceans kind of problem, not a strategy problem, but a human-sized business problem. Susan has got responsibility, a budget somewhere in the system, and something that isn't either working fast enough or well enough. Susan is the founder, the CMO, the head of department, the managing director of the company, the center operator, sorry, the operation center. Sorry, Stephen, I've already mangled that. Managing director, pro vice chancellor, etc. So you will get hired in 2026, not because of your passion for impact or change. You'll get hired because you can describe Susan's problem better than anyone else. So cold applications barely work. In fact, the arms race with AI applications and application screening, the stats are single-digit success rates for cold applications into the climate space. Most real jobs are shaped informally, scoped internally, filled before they often reach the market. So the question is, we don't need to be looking for jobs, we need to be looking for people, and specifically a person. And that immediately raises the question, not just who is Susan, but who is your Susan? So this is where most people hit the wall, because the moment that you ask that question, your brain does this. These are real answers from the question, or from climate job seeker question, around the first thing that comes to mind when you're asked to name your future direction. We have too many options, too many directions, too many, well, I could do any of these kind of answers. That is the tyranny of choice. And it quietly paralyzes otherwise capable people. And the reason that we need to know your one Susan is to ensure that you have sufficient focus. Because when you have that focus, then we can turn that sense of overwhelm into clarity and confidence and stop wasting hours scrolling for jobs, moving with no particular direction. And we stop wasting your time on hopeful or aspirational applications. And instead, we spend time on becoming visible and credible to the people who will become your future colleagues or collaborators, or maybe even co-founders. But most of all, we stop scattergunning or networking endlessly or sending countless outreach emails. And finally, we stop presenting a puzzle and we actually speak directly to the person that we want to help. And all of this means that we save time, the only resource that really matters. So how do we get to figuring out who your Susan is and then convince them that you are the right person to help them? If you've seen any of my work before, you know that there is that I'm a recovering management consultant, and I tend to think of chevron diagram, pyramid framework, result. And so there is a particular sequence of events. And broadly, we're going to summarize this rather than trying to go through all of the 8 steps in this meaningless set of icons. We're going to break it into 2 things. We're going to just do find your path, get the job, which sounds patronizingly obvious. But trust me, until you do this in the right sequence, everything is so much harder. So we're going to start with find your path. And this is where I was talking a little bit about Sarah, the trapped explorer, the exhaustive cycle of research, the job board scrolling, etc., etc. And the antidote here is decision. Now, I was telling Jonathan and Karen that I've married into a Greek family and that my Greek partner often gives me the English or Latin derivation of English words. But my favorite is that decide has the same root as insecticide, homicide, pesticide, decide. So when we think about choosing a particular career or sector or job to aim at, the answer isn't to choose one, it's to kill off the alternatives. And so the smartest way to choose to end with one particular direction is to increase our ability to say no more quickly. And that comes from criteria. Now, criteria is basically that simple set of decisions, and all of decision science talks about the strongest correlation between confidence and satisfaction with an outcome is not spending more time looking for more options. It's spending more time defining the criteria. How will you know when you found what you're looking for? And for the eagle-eyed, you can see that there are 4 different types, 4 different flavors of criteria, one of which has got a spelling mistake. Now, the fundamentals of the shape of work, the kind of questions that are quite easy to ask, but not necessarily easy to answer. So this framework of criteria starts with things like, well, obviously, is it geographically located? Is there a salary floor that you need? But then also, are there things like a particular type or style of organization that you prefer? Is there something around being a solo contributor versus a team player? What is your style of leadership and how does that work? And that bleeds into the strengths and the micro values and our sense of self and our identity. Now, values, strengths, and identity, they all get a bad reputation, partly because of the 1990s shift for a lot of corporates to suddenly need a value statement about selling soap. And it's rather devalued the idea. So when we think about values, I don't mean values like plastic in oceans is bad. I mean values like, do you value meritocracy or recognition? If you value meritocracy, you're far more likely to find a degree of alignment in an early stage small startup, because when the client wants something on a Friday, then everybody's working on Thursday because there's only 10 people there. Everyone is coming at this together. Whereas from a recognition perspective, go and work in one of the big strat houses, because every 6 months there is a performance review. Everyone gets a score. Those scores are put on a bell curve. Top 10% gets recognition. The bottom 10% gets invited not to participate anymore. So in each case, these criteria are only valuable and useful if they are testable. Because in order to be able to say no more quickly, we need to be able to ask, does this particular path or career or job type actually meet these criteria? And that's not always easy to know. Some of these questions around work culture, for example, or degree of fit with self can be very difficult and quite esoteric. So as part of the resources which you'll be sharing after this session, got something called the Career Detective, which is real world tests for career decision criteria. It's basically just, here is how to go and find out the answer to some of these criteria. So now we have our criteria, like a funnel or a filter. The next part is we need to fill this funnel. So the biggest problem with filling the funnel, of thinking of ideas of things that you want to do, is our own poor cognitive availability. It is likely that your dream role is something that you don't even know exists yet, because this space is vast. There are currently more than 200 distinct climate solutions being actively worked upon right now, just in the climate tech space. But most people can name about 10. So rather than figuring it out by figuring it out, which is evenings spent with a browser tab open, and then 10 browser tabs open, and then closing your laptop at the end of the evening, feeling more confused than before, we take a top-down and a bottom-up. So the top-down approach, well, we can crowdsource pre-vetted suggestions which are beyond our cognitive range, which is a great way of saying we take those criteria and we make a reverse job advert and we say, well, these are the 6 to 9 criteria which are most important. These are the environments in which I will thrive. It has nothing to do with your skills. It has nothing to do with your background or previous jobs. And you share that widely and broadly. And you're looking for, what would somebody with these criteria be good at and enjoy doing? Because we're applying a diversity of thinking that you and I simply cannot access, because the space is so broad and so vast. Secondly, we have the bottom up. Now, in this case, we have solutions like our friends over at Climate Drift. Now, there are a number of different versions of this. Speedandscale.com is another one, where there are maps of these are the extant solutions which are being worked on, and hopefully, in this case, categorized, top 12 categories. So taking time to study and reflect on the branches should give you a start point to research those that immediately speak to you and potentially open your eyes to new possible niches to explore. Now, the value of this isn't just that you will get to see something new. The value of this is to reassure yourself that you have actually got a reasonable working knowledge of all the areas that you could be working on, and that you won't experience that, well, what if there's something else further on down the line? Now, bringing this all together, like all good processes, we take a stab at the scientific method and we establish a testable hypothesis. And a testable hypothesis always has the same format. It is the idea, I'm curious about helping X, which is either like an organization or potentially your Susan, do Y, which is the transformational value add that you bring, so they get Z. And we have to remember that the likelihood of getting this right first time, the likelihood of being able to say, after doing this work, that this is what I want to do when I grow up, is so vanishingly small, given the fact that you're trying to pluck 3 variables out of a set of tens of thousands in each case, that we have to be able to hold it lightly, but move on and act. Because the most important part of this work is to be taking action, rather than spending more time thinking about it and going round and round in circles. So once we've established this helping X do Y so they get Z, we've made a lot of assumptions to get there. And our next step is to test that. Now, a lot of people will immediately jump to, I'm not skilled enough, and therefore I need to go and do more training, and then invest in weeks and possibly hundreds, if not thousands of pounds. But we have to de-risk the application of our resources, namely time. And in order to do that, we have these rapid little pivot or persevere test loops. And that might be that we climb the ladder of commitment and we start with 5 conversations. And then we bring the information back 5 conversations over, let's say, 10 days. And we ask ourselves, given what I know now, do I think that the hypothesis that I have is going to meet the criteria that I start with? And based on my answer, am I going to pivot slightly or persevere? And we're only ever persevering in the next 10 days or the next incremental step up this ladder, so that we haven't decided at the start to sit down and take a 4-month course. We might get there, but before we get there, let's be more sure and more confident. And there's a fantastic Japanese phrase for this, which I cannot pronounce very well, but I'm going to give it a go. And apologies if anyone is either Japanese or has a good ear for this. What we need to do is we need to Genshi Genbutsu, which comes from the Toyota manufacturing plant with their 1980s revolution in how to actually get things done and improve things. And it basically translates as go see for yourself. So rather than having this theoretical perspective around what it might be like to go and do this kind of work, we have to go and see for ourselves, to engage in this space. And so that might start with these 5 conversations, and then maybe a short online course, short, critical, and cohort based, because we're looking for people. That might develop into a 2-day conference around a particular topic. And ultimately, we're looking to build a proof project, something that shows or establishes your proof of belonging. Now, the reason why this is so successful as an approach is because in climbing this ladder, we are learning all the time about the space, and specifically about Susan and the challenges that she faces. And we are interacting with people because each of these steps has a engage with the people who are in this space. And as we're doing so, get the opportunity to leave the breadcrumb trail of LinkedIn notes or articles or Substack or however you want to share and show that you are participating in and understanding this community. Because ultimately, the thing that gets us hired is credible visibility, which is what we're going to come on to next. Because once we have this direction, we then have to get the job that you want. And it is not time to suddenly start scrolling job boards and polishing your CV. It is time to start signaling, crafting your narrative, and framing your skills that are transferable so as to show that you understand more about Susan's problem. And we're going to take a very quick look at some of the specific actions that you can do to do this. I'm going to start with credibility, because this is one of the biggest blockers that I see in career transitions. The hiring managers, the collaborators, funders, your Susan, they're all asking the same question, which is broadly, why should we trust this person with this work? And it's that credibility gap. Doesn't mean that you lack the skills. It usually means that your story isn't landing or the way that you're framing it. It's the classic transferable skills question. Now, to be clear, if you are seeking a very, very technical role and you don't have that technical skill, then you have to go and get that skill. But in the majority of cases, there is a huge step forward that you can take when you can translate what you have done into something which is familiar to Susan. And there is a big overlap around either the scale of organization. Have you worked in startups before? Yes, then you appreciate how hard it is to operate very lean budgets when there's a client pressure. Same with, have you worked in product or on a SaaS platform? Do you have that kind of transferable awareness, the contextual awareness of what it is like to work on that kind of product or service? And the last one is the overlap around particular clients. Have you had lots of exposure consulting to the large FMCG set? Because if you're looking to work for maybe a SaaS platform who wants them as clients and they don't have that, then there's an incredibly useful set of experience to say that you understand how matrix organizations determine budget and ultimately allocate their cash. So the important thing here is that I see so often is that people rely on their CV to do the work. But that is too late in the process. We have to come in before there. And critically, we have to bear in mind something that I was taught early on in my consulting career, and that is the principle of don't make them think. If your client has to do the thinking, you have already lost. It is our job to do the thinking. So we don't present our potential colleagues or collaborators or co-founders, we don't present them as a puzzle. We show them that we understand their problem, which is right back to Susan again, right? We don't give them a puzzle. We show where these overlaps are. We show that we understand the business issue that she is facing, the thing that she is lying awake at night thinking about. And we do that broadly 3 simple ways. The first one is proof projects. So what would that look like? Well, that could be a 2-week solo project tackling a real sustainability problem. Might be volunteering in a virtual initiative. Might be building something using AI. That's quite important right now. Writing a previous case study or piece of work, but framed through Susan's lens, or share a teardown or a model of something as a resource on LinkedIn. Here's what I do differently. There's a couple of great examples. I had a client who wanted to work in the renewable sector. She was a UX designer. And so we came up with the idea of taking solar installation company, looking at their sales page, and she used whatever the modern day equivalent of Photoshop is, cut it up, and then applied that UX conversion rate optimization process to that and shared the video of her thinking, like, this is why you are losing money. And then she shared it not only to the company, but also posted on LinkedIn. And then she did the next one, and then she did the next one. And very soon she was hired because clearly she's repetitively saying, my skills are going to save you money. Clear proof, solving Susan's problem. So the nice thing about this is that majority of them do not need permission. They are a thing that you can do with a little bit of creative thinking. So the next part is the shape what you have and the tell your story. They're kind of interlinked. We often undersell ourselves because of this translation of past experience. And we talked a little bit about the 3 main areas of overlap and how to take on that. But there is this problem of framing within the language of Susan. So we might find that sales becomes partnerships or marketing becomes comms. So take 5 to 10 job descriptions, get AI to give you a point of view, and then break down the skills and tasks and ask for 5 synonyms of each of those and see where they overlap with what you currently have in your CV. Because it might be that you already have these skills, you're just not recognizing them because the language in use is so different. And then thirdly is to tell your story clearly. Now, this is kind of the almost, it's the classic, can somebody else understand what you want to do? And it's not the what problem am I solving and why did it matter? It's not to you. No one cares about the things that you have done unless you can frame it in Susan's organizational context. So people have to be able to understand what you've done and what you want to do next incredibly easily. Because when somebody else understands what it is that you want to do, they can advocate on your behalf as well. And it's less then about you constantly telling the people and more about other people being able to help and advocate as well. So easy ones for that might be shaping up your LinkedIn, helping X do Y so they get Z. The classic, and this is awful, but it kind of required that sort of 30-second elevator pitch. It's about owning the future version of yourself, which, if you're struggling with the imposter syndrome, it's a great way to start owning that sense of, well, this is where I am heading. So practice your story out loud, test it in conversations, refine what lands, and then change and adapt accordingly. Now, this is not easy. And so as part of the resource pack, which we'll send over, there is a comprehensive guide to basically make them get you, climate career positioning. The concept of this session is this contents page. Well, here is an entire chapter based just for the how do you position yourself in the market? How do you participate? How do you make people understand what it is that you've done and what you want to do? Which brings us to visibility. Because being credible is all fine and good, but if no one knows about it and you remain invisible, no one can see that signal. And in climate and sustainability, a lot of opportunities are quite informal. There's a referral or a recommendation. You kind of get invited in. But people can't do that if they can't remember who you are and what you do. So in the chat, in one word, how do you feel when you see this? Give me a couple of impressions. What is your current relationship with LinkedIn? How do you describe it? And Petra, I see your comments. about sorry, Andrew, yes, that's a very good point. Never assume that Susan understands her own problem. Very much so. Spend too much time. It's a tool, discomfort. It's a tool. Irina, 10 points. There are no points, but you get 10 points. That's exactly right. It is a tool. So I find that a lot of people have a hate-hate relationship. Necessary evil. A lot of this comes from exactly this comparative issue, and not feeling like we have anything valuable to say because of the imposter syndrome that goes with that, resulting in sentiments like this. But we don't need to. And just kind of putting a couple of flavor from some of the earlier comments that I've read through, a lot of this is helpful to teach or to share with your students because this is some of the challenges that they will be facing in the modern employment space. So when you get this, feel free to pick the snippets which you think are going to be most useful to in your teaching experience, and feel free to adopt it. The challenge with visibility is feeling like we have to be the expert before we start. And that simply isn't the case. Because what we're looking for is we're looking for the opportunity not to network, but to build a community of practice. And that community of practice is finding the people. And the real momentum comes when people don't just see your work, they start talking about it and sharing it, but it is you joining that conversation. It's not reaching out and saying, hey, can we have a coffee conversation because I'm interested in what you're doing. Instead of networking, we can think of curiosity, connection, and consistency to build this community of practice. Curiosity, because the value of asking a smart question in places like LinkedIn is massively under-recognized. And so find the leading thought leaders, the pracademics, as I like to think of them, the practical academics who are engaging with, but also drawing and driving the conversation in a particular sector, and ask smart questions on their posts. Give them the opportunity to answer. It is a gift for them to be speaking to an audience that they want to help. So showing curiosity is a great way of joining a conversation rather than necessarily having to turn up and give a point of view. The second part is connection, because as you are learning this space, you can recognize the connections between disparate groups of people and then connect them together. And that might be something as classic and as patronizingly obvious as I saw this podcast and I thought of you, and send and share and connect. But one of the first things that I advise people to do is to, for a particular niche topic, a particular Susan, is find the things and other people in Susan's space and put together a list and then share that list and say, I've been curious about supply chain decarbonization, specifically around cocoa and the farmer level integration of technology. And these are the 5 people that I think are currently leading this conversation. Tag those 5 people in, share it, and ask, who else is part of that? Or who else have I missed? So we are connecting without having an expertise. And the final part is consistency. People tend to take networking as a verb and do it by going somewhere to network. And in the modern modern world that we live in, that is no longer really as valuable or the only way to do this. And so consistency is keeping track of who you're speaking to and who you're engaging with. And there are tools that sit on top of LinkedIn to basically give you a CRM that can track who you're speaking to and why and how they connect with others. And again, you can then build that regular habit of connecting on a daily or every other day. And so you are participating in these conversations. So with all this in mind, this point about not having to be the expert is that the more we participate in these conversations, the easier the application and the interview become, because they are extensions of conversations that you are already in. And the mechanics of, well, how do you write a good application, or how do you write a good CV, or how do you win an interview? Well, it all starts with your knowledge of Susan and that problem. So that sequence, that full-scale approach of defining how you'd know, figuring out this testable hypothesis, and then playing with the idea of the Susan that you want to help, is a way of making sure that as you come towards that CV and application process, you're already primed to be having the visible credibility. That means that when you do apply, and the first thing that someone does, as they always will, 97% of recruitment decision makers will immediately check out your LinkedIn, is check in that LinkedIn and see that you have this consistency and this visible credibility. Okay, I'm going to take questions very shortly. I'm just going to give a quick reminder in that it is the doing, not thinking. And it's back to that point I made at the top. One thing that you're going to do differently because of what you've learned today. Otherwise, it's turning up and ticking the dopamine box of feeling like you've done something without actually changing a thing that you've done. So for those who are in a career pivot, then it is committing to action, committing to this process. And it can mean often stopping the application cycle and diagnosing, well, where is it I need to spend time? What have I doing that I've got wrong? And to help with that, I have built a tool, a diagnostic, to say, like, answer these 11 questions and get a point of view of what is it that you are in that sequence. Where is the point at which you should be spending time? Because time is the most important thing. My mission is that condensing the amount of time between where you are and what you want and making that contribution. So we'll follow up with a link to that. I can chuck it in the notes in the chat, and then I'll go through some of these questions. So if you have questions, now is the time to chuck them into chat. Okay.
There is this sharing your slides, Andy, at this point, then people can see each other.
Yeah.
And the camera's on.
Yep. I say yes. Technical button pressing.
So I will stop
share
recording now also, so that people feel free to